Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett. Today I'm going to share some tips and tricks that I use with the router and router table. Before I do, I want to remind you, if you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to do that. And let's look at the first router tip. When I'm working on my router table or working with my freehand router, I often have many different things around. I might have some wrenches, tape measures, obviously I'll have bits of wood, and very often I'm working with more than one router bit as well. And in the past I've usually just laid my router bits on the workbench, which is not a great idea because if they crash by accident, if they crash into a steel tool, you can chip the carbide. I've never had one roll off the workbench yet, but I know a lot of people who have, and the carbide has got chipped when it hits a concrete floor. If that happens, that router bit should never be used again because there could be a hairline crack there that at some point in the future when you're using that bit, that piece of carbide could come off at you at high speed, and that can be some pretty serious injury if that happens. So what I've done, I've just made a holder. This is just a temporary holder for when I'm working around my workbench to hold my router bits. And it also keeps them organized. And of course, there's two different sizes because I have two different sizes of router bits. And I've made them, the holes, I've made them large enough to fit any of my largest router bits. And of course, they have 1/2 and 1/4 inch size. And the holes are a little bit enlarged so that it's easy to get the router bits out. I don't have to struggle to get them out. I made it out of white because that way it contrasts with wood. So I don't want more wood on wood, and it also contrasts with the top of my router table. So just a quick, easy way of keeping yourself organized and making sure you keep your bits from getting damaged. Now, when we're pushing wood through a router, particularly when we're making things like doors, we need to have it aligned to the fence, and we never use a miter gauge on a router in conjunction with a fence. Just exactly the same as a table saw. You never use a miter gauge with a fence. So what we use instead on the router table is we use something called a push block. And because we always need to be exactly 90 degrees to the bit, what I do, I just use 3/4 inch plywood or any other 3/4 inch wood, and I check the angles. When I make these, I check the angles to make sure that they're absolutely 90 degrees, and I just draw a line on them like that, and that always identifies a piece of wood to me that I know I've already checked to make sure that the angles are perfect. So when I push that through, I know that I'm going to get a perfect cut every time. Just a quick way of identifying push blocks and a safe way of using your router. This could be the simplest mortising jig you'll ever use. And I'm not even going to show you how to make it. If I get enough requests, I'll show you how to make it. But it's very simple. It's, in my case, a couple of pieces of scrap 3/4 inch plywood. They're glued and screwed together. And you can see the bottom here. I've just put bolts in and cut a couple of slots here, and of course this can move back and forth, and all this does is sit in my vise like this, and then I can put in a piece of wood that I want to cut a mortise in, and I'm just going to line, in this case, with the top, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to cut slots or mortises in there. So I've just set up, because this is just a demo, I've just set up a couple of pencil lines, one here, and that'll be my start, and that'll be my stop. And I've also set the depth, and I'll just do a couple of passes, just so you can see just how quick and easy this is. There, and you can see how quick and easy it is to make that slot in there. You could use that as mortise. I've just used a 1/4 inch bit, and I didn't particularly align it in any situation. And if I wanted to make it absolutely perfect, I would have put some wood stops there so that it wouldn't have gone back and forth. But that was just a freehand cut, quick and easy, just a great little jig for cutting mortises or slots. If you've ever drilled a hole in a piece of wood and discovered that that hole is not quite large enough, here's a great way of making that larger. Now I just used a hole saw and cut that out, but you know, I have another hole saw, but it's almost impossible to get another hole saw, first of all, to line up, and secondly, to cut it exactly the size that I need. But here's what we can do with the router. I'm here at the router table, and I have installed a rabbeting bit, and rabbeting bits use a variety of different size bearings. Here's another one that I have, and these bearings are interchangeable. I don't know why I have 3 rabbeting bits, but I do. There's one bearing size, there's another one, and there's yet another one, and there's even more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop this piece of wood down over top of my rabbeting bit, and the bearing is going to ride against my existing hole, and the cutting edge, which is right there, is going to cut me a brand new perfectly round hole in there. Then I'm going to take that bit out and I'm going to put in my flush trim bit, and I'm going to flip the wood over, and that bearing will ride on my new cut, and the carbide will then cut the new size hole. So let me show you how it looks. Now I've installed my flush trim bit, and you can see that I've set it up so that the bearing is going to ride on the fresh cut that I've just made, and the new cutter is going to make a brand new path. Isn't that amazing how easy that is to do? And I could make that hole bigger again by repeating that, or I could have used a little bit smaller bearing initially, but you can keep making that larger and larger and larger, as large as you need that. Here's another way of edging wood. If you don't have a jointer, this is one method that I used a long time ago, and it works great. Basically what we do is we have a piece of MDF here, and I always use the factory edge. It's nice and straight and flat. I like to use a very thin piece of plywood just above it, and I don't know if you can tell, but the plywood is just back about a 1/16 of an inch, and the reason I like to do that is I'm going to be using a flush trim bit, and I don't want my trim bit to be edging or even touching this MDF here. I don't want it to get damaged at all. So I use this as a little bit of a transition, and that way I don't have to worry about it. All we need to do with this is to move the wood that I'm going to edge here, and we just put it just barely over the wood that we're going to use. So the flush trim bit is going to be running with the bearing on the MDF material, and then it will be cutting this spalted wood that we have here. Now, where I use this quite frequently is when I'm using veneers and I need to get a very straight edge on a veneer. It's very hard to do that, and I use this methodology. I sandwich the veneer between 2 pieces of MDF, and it gives me an excellent job. But this works very well too. So I'm just going to take a minute now and clamp this down, and we'll run that wood through, and I'll show you what it looks like. So that's the methodology behind it. And you know, from time to time, you're going to run into situations where your clamp is not going to be able to do the full reach. But you know what? You've got 90% of it covered, or maybe more. Typically, I would try and clamp it from the back if you can, so that I get a full run on there. And often I'm cutting off the ends anyway, so it's not a big deal. But that's just one way of being able to edge wood if you don't have a jointer. Well, that concludes my video for today. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.